This program on investing under regulation crowdfunding is not investment advice.
Rising with the crowd, power unbound, change makers lead where hope is found. Superpowers for good, shaping the fate. Investors and dreamers open the gate. Super Crow stands loud, proud, and true, building tomorrow for me and you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Superpowers for Good show from the Super Crowd. I'm your host, Devin Thorpe, and we're thrilled to have you here today. I've got an extraordinary guest. You're really going to enjoy meeting them. Alexis Penney is our guest, and they run a yoga studio that's raising capital on Honeycomb Credit. You don't want to miss this. Stick around. Alexis, welcome to the show. We're just thrilled to have you here today.
Hey, Devin, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Well, the pleasure is all ours. Tell us about your business. What are you doing there with this, I think you call it inner space. Tell us about this.
So Inner Space is primarily a yoga studio, and we're, of course, we're more than a yoga studio because we actually have movement offerings, dance, qigong, martial arts, but yoga is definitely the bulk of our programming. It's the bread and butter. So it's a big, beautiful room, that has a real beautiful history in the community. It's been here about 10 years, and in addition to that, we are also kind of a community hub. So I'm not only managing Inner Space, the studio, and its programming and offerings and the staff of teachers that we have, but I'm also managing our 13 tenant spaces. So we have 13 subleased spaces that are ranging from businesses like we have estheticians that are doing hair, doing lashes. We have people that are doing energy healing. We have a couple of nonprofit service organizations that rent office space from us. There's a vintage clothing dealer. Like there's a whole range of people that are engaging with us as tenants. And then there's kind of their larger communities. So we do a fair amount of community events and stuff like that. And we share a big common area with like a big lobby and, kitchen and stuff like that. So it's kind of this beautiful experiment in co-working, and that brings different communities and customer bases together. And the studio kind of anchors it.
I think that's pretty amazing. You've got such a wide range and diversity of things going on. It has some really, I think, synergistic effects, it sounds like to me, because it expands the community, right? You've got all these different, it diversifies your income, because now you've got rental income from 13 different tenants. You lose one, no big deal. You go get you replace it, right? This is really kind of a cool business. What's the story? What's the history?
Well, it's interesting because I actually think it's kind of the future. Like, I think there's a really big movement towards this happening right now, because there's a lot of folks. This is kind of the opposite of your question, the past, but the future is I see, we have a waiting list, basically a mile long. We never have a vacant space. There's a lot of folks right now who really aren't wanting a big flagship retail space or office suite, but actually wanting to share, not only the engagement with community and customer bases and stuff like that, and sort of like you said, the synergy of cross-pollination that happens when you share a physical location, but also just share the responsibility. Not everyone wants to rent a huge space, right? So there's a lot of demand actually for this sort of mid to smaller co-working space or lease space for businesses and people that do work that isn't necessarily maybe storefront vibe, but still needs its own dedicated space. But the history is, it was hatched by the former owner and the founder, Laura Frank, who really hatched it as a way to subsidize the yoga studio. because at that time, over 10 years ago in Kansas City, yoga was not the common thing that it has become. So it really did kind of need the subsidy, but it was also always seen as we want to be in community with other businesses and practitioners that actually flow with our vibe, right? That actually are either friends of the studio in some form, or students, or other teachers, or who their energy or their offering or their aesthetic somehow just aligns. And so it was kind of a way to take this epic building. This is an old kind of theater space that's been here for over 100 years, and really reimagine it as something new, but also as something that could really be viable with the ups and downs of the market that you see in a sales-based business like in yoga, which can be very seasonal. So yeah, but I do see it. I see it really replicated a lot, and I see it happening more and more, especially even in like larger investment in development and stuff like that. You see spaces like this where people are trying to create community, not just, have some kind of faceless rental company,
Yeah, it is kind of amazing. Tell us a little bit about the neighborhood that you're in. You're in Kansas City, right? And so
We're in,
that always freaks people out. That's in Missouri, right?
uh-huh. That was my next
Not
thing. Yeah,
Kansas.
we're in Kansas City, Missouri. And for those that aren't familiar, we're just a state line away from Kansas City, Kansas. These are two big municipalities that are mashed together, and it's an interesting dynamic there. So we definitely have some students that join us from the Kansas side because we're only about 10 minutes away. But this is a really interesting neighborhood. It has a lot of history, not all of it good, frankly. But it's a really dynamic neighborhood. It's been changing a lot over the last 20, 30 years. And so we are in the midst of a major push and development. We've got, in 3 blocks, we've got 3 major developments happening in terms of construction. We have a 60-unit affordable housing complex going in right behind us, which is really awesome and exciting because it's going to be a complex that has no barriers for income barriers. So there's a lot about this neighborhood that is painful in the sense that the street we're on, Troost, was historically the red line, where there were literally housing covenants about non-white or people of color or Black people not being able to rent or own west of that line, and even close to the several blocks west of it, right? So there's been a lot of shifts around that, but it still is an area that brings up a lot of energy, especially for Kansas City natives, for people who have been here a while. There was a lot of violence here in the 80s and 90s during some of the drug and gang epidemics that kind of swept the nation at that time. So what happened is that it attracted a lot of service organizations. So we sit in neighborhood relationship with a ton of really service-oriented nonprofits, some of them coming from like a religious sector, some of them not at all. Our next door neighbors, for example, are a program called Amethyst Place, and they provide long-term supportive housing to women and families that are coming out of housing crisis who are in recovery from drug and alcohol addiction. So there's an energy of healing here. A friend of mine who is Melissa Civil, she's Kansas City's poet laureate. We've been working on a project, a community art project here. And one thing she taglined it with is, we heal at the wound. So the site of so much conflict and, hard history for a lot of people to hold has also become this site of healing and growth for a lot of people. There's a lot of recovery supportive housing. There's just a lot of supportive housing in general. There's service organizations that do like preschool and daycare and stuff like that for families that can't afford it otherwise. There's just a lot of cool stuff happening in this area. So we do feel like we're kind of in the vein, even though we are a for-profit venture, we're in kind of the same energy of healing and creating a sanctuary in a space and a neighborhood that hasn't always been this way. But nowadays you look around and it's like there's brand new condos right across the street and you're like, wow, it's a really different Troost. So it's just, there's a lot of complexity going on here, but it's cool.
Yeah.
It's an exciting time.
Well, it seems like one of the cool things you're doing is this Honeycomb offering, which allows people to invest in the business and participate in a grassroots redevelopment of this neighborhood. Is that part of the reason you've decided to run a crowdfund offering instead of going to a bank?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of one of those magical necessity breeding, like a perfect synchronicity. Because frankly, like we, in a lot of ways, walking into this business purchase, I just was not financeable. I just didn't know I didn't know what I needed to show versus hide, right? I had kind of been a freelancer for so long, and that mindset was hard for me to step out of. Like, oh, now you want me to declare all my income? So that was kind of a funny thing that has still been a big learning for me as a business owner. But we worked with a nonprofit for our business purchase to take over the business last year, and they're called AltCap. And so they work with people like me who are like, the banks are maybe, it's basically, we didn't need enough money to even qualify for a bank loan, but we needed more money than we had, right? So there was that kind of, you're in that kind of weird like armpit zone of like, it's like too little to come up off of your own, but it's like you're almost, or too much, but it's too little for the banks to even really want to touch it. Because most of these banks, they're working on a 200-300, $500,000 loans, for most business purchases and stuff like that. So we just don't really we're not really on that radar. And so when one of our businesses up the street, our neighbors, which are a coffee shop called Anchor Island, and they're queer and Latinx owned, so we have a lot of resonance with them and overlap with our customer base, and just think they're a great business. When they did an offering on Honeycomb, it really piqued my interest. And I was like, oh, this is cool. Because I had learned, as I've been kind of in this crash course of business administration, like we really need cash flow. We really need capital, right? Like it's as one of my coaches puts it, it's not necessarily about what you have in the bank. It's about your access to credit and equity. And yet it's like, I didn't want to do an equity offering. I didn't want someone to own the business who maybe wouldn't have the same mission and goals in mind, who'd maybe just had a profit motive. We have a profit motive and a mission and other goals and community in mind. So Honeycomb, even just the name really excited me because I could feel, we have a lot of pollinator stuff planted, like native plants that one of our interns planted all around our grounds. So we have all these beautiful flowers that are being swarmed by bees all the time. And it's a really cool piece of our landscape, right? So the honeycomb thing just kind of resonated on a lot of levels for us.
Sure, I get that. And, the offering, the URL for Honeycomb is long and complex. So I created this short link for folks, s4g.biz/inner. Will take you directly to the Honeycomb offering for Alexis's offering. I encourage you to check it out. It really is a great opportunity for us to support Alexis and in building a community business that is supporting this a great community. So listen, we're going to take a quick break here, but let me recap. We're here with Alexis Penney, the head of the Inner Space yoga studio in Kansas City, and an amazing story. I love what they're doing. We're going to shift gears now, and when we come back, we'll talk to Alexis about their superpower. So in the meantime, stick around, and we'll be right back.
You can get in on the ground floor to help fix the climate crisis for as little as $100. Pause now to scan the QR code to get started or visit s4g.biz/raisegreen. You can be a green at Raise Green.
Want to learn from the world's great change makers? Find your superpower. Subscribe to the Superpowers for Good newsletter at superpowersforgood.com. Make your strengths into superpowers that will change the world. Join the super crowd today. Superpowers4good.com.
Hope to raise money from the impact crowd. Good investors are as interested in community, social or environmental impact as you. Connect with Funding Hope, an SEC-registered FINRA member crowdfunding portal to learn how to raise capital from the impact crowd. Scan the QR code now.
Welcome back, everyone. You know, we're having such a great conversation today with Alexis Penney, the head of the Inner Space KC Yoga Studio. It's just a great conversation. We've been talking about the business. We're going to shift gears now to talk to them about their superpower. So stick around. You don't want to miss this. Alexis, you know, I love the way you have come at this business, right? You know, truly a grassroots approach, truly building the community. It's really pretty amazing. And it's difficult to do. And so kudos to you for having made so much progress. I love the diversity of the business. I mean, you're just doing a lot of cool things. Tell us now, what is your superpower?
I think that my superpower is my sense of scale. I think of it as kind of the capacity to fractal in and out. So I have like a real hyper focus on details, and I'm definitely a details person. Like I'm straightening things. I'm, you know, asking teachers that teach for me to like hit certain marks, you know, like let's not go over a minute past the class time, that kind of stuff. Like I'm really into the details. And I also know when to scale out, because there's a moment where you can get lost in the details and lose sight of the big picture. And so that capacity to hold both of them in tension, both the big picture, the ecosystem impact, the ecological impact, the community impact, the systemic idea of like looking at things from a systems perspective of not just, oh, let me communicate this one thing to this one employee or this one tenant, but how do we systemize this, right? Like how do we create a culture and a climate where everyone is actually kind of like doing what we're trying to communicate on their own, basically, as a way to kind of feed this system. So that capacity to hold both of those in tension, I think that's one of my main superpowers. It's kind of my thing that came up when I was thinking about coming on the show today.
You know, it's a powerful superpower that you're talking about, that ability to balance the details and the big picture. That's golly, a lot of us struggle with that, right? It is so difficult. You know, we talk about, you know, the devil is in the details. We should be all focused there. And that's really not true, because the big picture is so much more important. But if you lose those details, you can lose people, right? They don't want to feel like they're missing out or leaving early. But if the class ends at 5 o'clock, you got to stop at 5 o'clock. You know, so, you know, everything matters. Finding the balance, so important. I get it. It's hard to do, though. I kudos to you. I wonder if you could give us an example. And you kind of leaned into this a little bit already, but I want you to go just a little deeper. Share maybe a story of a time when you sort of brought this ability to bear and accomplish something you're proud of. Can you think of a specific example, a story to share?
Yeah, so when I took over, we had one cleaning person, and it just wasn't being cleaned up to snuff for my personal standards. And my training was in yoga studios in New York City initially. So like we were held to really high standards there, but they were community spaces. So it's like we all pitched in together, right? And so having a system where we only had this one cleaner, I was thrown off by that. And right away, I could tell this person and I were not vibing, right? Like it just wasn't happening. And they kind of like through a series of conversations, they navigated an exit, and it left me kind of high and dry. So for a couple of weeks, I'm cleaning my new business by myself, just me, right? And clearly it was a really great learning experience because I got to know the space. And I think it was honestly kind of fated. I really got to know the space at a level that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And so I really got to know, oh, this bathroom mirror has these little things on it. This, like this, these are the things, these are the marks that I want people to hit. this corner accumulates cobwebs more than all the other ones. So make sure you look at that. So then I posted in our newsletter, I said, hey guys, we have, because I'm like, at the beginning, we don't have a lot of capital, right? But I do have yoga. I have endless amounts of classes, and there's no loss for me to actually have more bodies in my classes. There's actually a gain there because it feels good to have more bodies in the room. So I posted an ad saying, hey, we have work trade available. Who wants to participate? That's like been a standard thing of almost every other studio I've worked at on both coasts. So suddenly all these magical people show up that they're bridging that gap between not only do I have the skills and the time and I have the need, I want to do yoga and I don't have the money for it, but they have the interest. You know, that's like, it's not like our equity-based pricing is like all that expensive. Most of these people probably could afford, but they wanted to feel like their gifts were being brought into the space, right? They wanted that investment, not a capital investment, an investment of labor. And that's like a real thing, because I get it. My first studio, before I was a teacher there, I would just show up at the end of the night and say, hey, can I clean? Because that just makes me feel good. And I'm, you know, I was newly sober then, all kind of things. You know, it was how I worked out some of my stuff. So these magical people show up. Suddenly we systemize it to the degree that I don't have to clean, which is good for me because I frankly have things I need to be doing that only I can do. And then we had enough cleaners that when people showed up for work trade saying, hey, I would like to do work trade, I started asking, so what do you have? And like I mentioned earlier, we have all these pollinator plants planted now because this amazing woman shows up and she's like, you know, I'm not going to clean the studio, but I'm an expert in native plants and I have tons of native plant starts in my yard. So I can plant and take over your gardening. I'm like, boom, there you go. Amazing. So the system built itself just from my willingness to put the ad out and administrate it and actually deal with the, you know, people emailing me, set up the meeting, chat with them, put protocols in place on a Google Docs so that people know how to, you know, how to interact with the space on their own. So I'm not having to like be their babysitter, you know? And so it's something that I'm actually really proud of because it has been a part of why our space looks like. The former owner is still a teacher here, and she was like, I've never seen this place look so clean. And that feels really good. But then people walk in and they see the flowers, they see the plants, you know, it just feels like more than I could have done myself. I don't know that much about plants, frankly.
Yeah.
You know,
it is more than you could do yourself, isn't it? It is.
Totally.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. That's really brilliant. And I'm sitting here thinking, my mind is almost beginning to wander as I think about how can I do that in my business? But tell us, give us some tips, you know, for broadly speaking, kind of deploying your ability to see detail and big picture. How can we learn to do that ourselves and implement that in our own businesses, in our own lives?
And this is good in your home too. Like this is I think it's actually really applicable in any aspect of life. So the first thing is to not look at problems as problems, but to actually like see them as things that are just grabbing your attention. So I'm noticing that. It's like, you know, it's like it's a thing. So I always have a going list of things. And sometimes it's not like I have to fix that. It's I'm curious about that. Like why am I noticing that consistently? And instead of jumping immediately into the fix, and especially the curse of, I think, most small business owners or like owner operators, owner managers, is we immediately fix it ourselves. I'm seeing that, I'm going to fix it myself. Every time I walk by that, I'm going to fix it myself. So instead of doing that, then once I have a list of a few 3 to 5 to 7 things like that, then I'm starting to categorize and I'm starting to put those into buckets and say, oh, these are all facilities versus this is more of an HR thing. This is more of a human thing versus, you know what I mean? Like whatever your categories are given your situation. And then it's like really panning out. And one thing I've really learned too is to really always take a census, have a going census of who the stakeholders are in a situation, who's interacting with the space, who's interacting with the product or the business or whatever it is, like who really has a stake here, even if they don't know it. My neighbors are part of my stakeholders, right? Like Miss Claudia, who lives around the corner, who's lived here for 50 years, who just knows everything going on. She's one of my stakeholders, even if she doesn't know it. And so then kind of combining, like, how do I fit those buckets into my sense of the ecosystem? Who do I need to talk to address these buckets? What system can I put into place to address these buckets? That kind of thing. That's kind of my process around
Yeah,
that.
that's great. In 10 seconds, how do people learn more and invest?
So go to the link that is posted here. And if you lose track of that link, you can just go and there's a link to our Honeycomb campaign there, or you can go to the and just search for Inner Space. And
fantastic. Thank you so much for being with us today. We want to wish you every success there, both in terms of the yoga and in terms of the neighborhood.
Devin, it's a pleasure.
All righty, now let's do some good.